Welcome to ECED 402-502. This is a quick introduction to the course and a little bit about early literacy development. This PowerPoint is much longer than this video will be, and you will see this PowerPoint come back as we move through the course and talk about different topics in our weekly modules. So please go ahead and download the PowerPoint and have it available, again, as we walk through it at different points in time during the course. So let's just move through and talk about what literacy development entails. And again, this is a summary of one of our book chapters. We know that all children have literacy skills. So some of their skills may not fit into the conventions, or our children might not communicate or be literate in the way a typically developing child might be, or the way we expect. So sometimes we have to adjust those expectations and use different strategies to extract those literacy skills to be able to identify them or to be able to assess them. So we need to be flexible and fluid in our thinking and look outside of general conventions. We're going to study what those conventions are, but we also have to be flexible to look at our diverse learners and how they're showing us their literacy and language development. We also will talk about what a literacy-rich environment looks like and how we can make those materials within a literacy-rich environment accessible to all of our students. So that will take on different meanings for different groups of students. And we need to have a diverse set of materials to meet the diverse needs of our diverse students. Teachers serve as models in literacy and language development. So they model literacy behaviors and strategies, and then they scaffold material and instruction to meet the individual needs of our students so that our students can develop and demonstrate their literacy skills. So take a minute and think about, how do you model literacy strategies for your students, or how would you model literacy strategies? What would you do before we even begin this course and learn about some of those strategies? Where are your preconceived ideas about what that looks like, or what literacy strategies look like? And again, for this course, we're really looking at our preschool aged and kindergarten aged students. So for those very young learners, what would you do to model literacy strategies? So take a minute to think about that. And you might want to even pause the video so that you can have some time to think. So one of the first things we want to think about is prior knowledge. What do our students know? What experiences have they had as far as literacy development and language development? This is very, very important for us to think about for our individual students and for our students in a class as a whole, and for the age of our students. We have very diverse learners in our classroom, and we make assumptions about prior knowledge and have expectations of what students know and should be able to do when they come to us in our classrooms. To some extent, we have to throw those expectations and assumptions out the door, and we really have to think about what experiences have our children had. Our students have a wide variety of influences in their lives about literacy development. We'll talk about those later in the course, but we really need to think about whether or not our assumptions are erroneous and what we expect kiddos to have been exposed to before they come to us. So we really want to think about that and think about how that drives what we do and what we provide in our classrooms for those students. So some of our students will have very rich literacy experiences. Others will have no literacy experiences. So how can we balance what we do in our classrooms or when we're working with our students one-on-one, maybe outside of the classroom? What are we going to do to make sure that we kind of level the playing field and provide experiences for all of our students? We also want to think about engagement and motivation. What do we do for our students to get them engaged in literacy and learning and get them engaged in language development? What motivates our students? What motivates our students as a whole, as a class, and what motivates them individually? How can we tap into their innate curiosity to build upon that and really engage our students in literacy development? So we want to think about that for our very young students, and we also want to support that engagement and motivation with active involvement, hands-on experiences with literacy materials. So we're going to pick up and continue with a discussion about our instruction. One of the first things that is very important for us to understand when we're planning our lessons are not a series of activities. When we're doing our lesson planning, we're looking much deeper than just an activity. An activity is key to our lesson planning. That is the practice piece of the lesson. But we really need to focus on the direct instruction piece. This tends to get pushed aside where we're just thinking about activities to do for our kiddos. That's not where we want to start. What are we going to do to engage and hook our students in the lesson? What are we going to do to activate prior knowledge? And then what are we going to do to provide direct instruction and explicitly teach skills, the literacy skills that we want our students to learn? So we really need to think long and hard about how we're going to teach the skills. How are we going to teach them in a large group? How are we going to teach them in a small group? How are we going to teach them one-on-one? Literacy instruction needs to meet the needs of our students as a whole and individually. We need to look at the cultural and linguistic needs of our students. Again, they're very diverse, so we need to take all of this into consideration when we are planning our direct instruction in literacy. We also want to look at how to support an integrated curriculum. We're not teaching literacy in isolation and having just literacy time or just reading time or just writing time. We want to integrate it across the content areas and across the developmental domains. So we're not looking at just literacy. We're looking at reading, writing, listening, speaking, and the content areas, and how can we integrate them all together to provide rich experiences for our young students. We also need to refer to standards. What are the standards that we're using to develop literacy in our young children? In preschool, in Virginia, we use the Virginia Foundation Blocks for Early Learning. We use them for our 4-year-olds. For 3-year-olds, sometimes we look at the foundation blocks, but they are set for 4-year-olds. Usually for 3s, we might be looking at Head Start standards. Our school divisions might have standards. We have the milestones of child development. But for 4-year-olds, we're really focused on the foundation blocks for early learning, and they are published by the Virginia Department of Education. They're linked on Blackboard. When we move into instruction in kindergarten, that's where we move into the SOLs, the standards of learning. Those are the standards that drive what we teach at individual grade levels in individual subject areas in Virginia. So we have to have those two standards, sets of standards on our radar when we're teaching literacy to young children. We also want to think about instruction. Assessment. How are we going to assess our students and find out where they are with regards to the various components of literacy development? We want to have ongoing and periodic assessment that informs our instruction. We're going to have some that are for accountability purposes, but we really want to have a well planned out assessment schedule or plan for how we can have a good understanding of where our kiddos are at any point in time. You're going to use a variety of assessment techniques, and we'll talk about some assessment in literacy later in the course. You also will have a full course on assessment. But you want to start thinking about how would you assess oral language? How would you assess comprehension? How would you assess fluency? How are you going to assess reading and writing? What are you going to do on an ongoing basis to know where your kiddos are at any point in time? And this applies to preschool and to kindergarten. And even in preschool, it does apply to our early childhood special education classrooms as well. What are we going to do to know where our kiddos are with regards to language and literacy development for those kiddos who already have some identified delays? So when we think about English language arts in Virginia, and when we look at our standards, we're thinking about oral language and we're thinking about written language. For oral language, we're talking about speaking and listening. Sometimes we forget about listening, but we want to make sure that we're thinking about speaking and listening. And we think about written language, we think about reading and writing. Those are the areas that we're going to explore more in depth as we move through this course. So again, take a few minutes. We're going to stop the video here. Take a few minutes and think about what would you do in each of these areas to support development in your classroom.